Coming up towards 7:36 in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, it doesn't ever seem that we're big on history, but let's deal with something that takes us back a few years, because we're going to focus on a couple of publications that make an interesting read on historic events that occurred in Trinidad and Tobago. And former journalist, veteran Raul Pantin, sadly passed away in 2015, who held many positions in his career and indeed filled many roles, in fact, right here at OCM as well. We are revisiting a couple of his works via his daughter Mandisa Pantin, who joins us now to discuss those two publications, Days of Wrath, which was released for the 30th anniversary of, re-release I should say, for the 30th anniversary of the 1990 coup attempt, and a book about the 1970 Black Power Revolution called Black Power Day. And I think she's also working on his memoirs, which should be coming out shortly. Mandisa Pantin, very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Morning to you.
Good to have you with us. How difficult is this for you to be revisiting your father's works and so on, and indeed to be doing his memoirs?
I would say that it is, particularly the book about the coup, Days of Wrath, has been something that has been difficult for me to revisit because it affected my family in a very particular way, as in my parents split up right after the coup. So it took me a while to even read the book. And when I was sort of appointed as the guardian of his work, I had to revisit and see what was important. And I thought it was very important for that book, once I read it finally, to be released. So it is a difficult thing. The memoir, I'm working through slowly, because I think once it's finally published for the first time, that it will be a very sort of important landmark, not only of my father's personal history, but also history of the country, because he became a journalist in the same year we became independent, which is an interesting factor. So,
and
yes.
as we talk about the memoirs and when that might come out, let's talk about a bit about Days of Wrath, a bit about Black Power Day and so on. What do you think people will get from that, if they haven't read them before, and many of us would not have, because we don't seem to be, at least at this point, people who are that interested in our own history. What do you think people will get? Let's start with Days of Wrath. What do you think people will get from that?
Well, the 1990 coup is something that people, I guess, my age would remember definitely, because we were teenagers around that time, besides personal effect. But I have found that a number of young people don't even know what it was or why it happened. And Days of Wrath in particular, which being a very personal account of being a hostage institute at the time of the coup, gives not only an historical account, but a personal journey through that process of being a hostage during that time. And therefore, it is not only educational, but interesting from a human perspective. And then in terms of, if we were to go on in terms of 1970 Black Power Day, that it, for some reason, happened to be witnessed to these two very key events 20 years apart in Trinidad and Tobago's history. So 1970, this is the Black Power revolution, which he covered for the Guardian at the point in time. He actually happened to be a business reporter who was walking past and saw the march start and got interested to see what really is going on behind that. So that's another sort of historical account with a personal bent to it. And these are two very key moments in Trinidad and Tobago's history. 1970 Black Power Revolution, 1992. A very pretty moment, but important moment.
And where are these publications available?
They're available right now through me. You'd have to contact me at 482-6074 or find me on Facebook, Mandisa Pantin.
And just repeat the number again.
482-6074.
6074. The whole issue of these significant events, it seems to be so much of a concerted effort, whether it's the politicians of the day or just people who would prefer not to remember or not to see the relevance of those events. But it just seems that there's a complete disconnect from, as you mentioned, that students, I've spoken to university students who know nothing at all about 1990, far less about 1970. And some will say, well, so what? What difference will it make me reading your father's account of those two events?
I think there's a societal issue where we don't want to deal with painful moments. We want to say Trinidad is God's land, right? And we want to say that nothing ever bad really happens in Trinidad. But when it does, we choose to ignore it. And I think that's a very frightening thing because if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. So I think reading books, and I even think that these books should be part of the school curriculum. If you're going to deal with days of wrath in 1970, perhaps the A-level sort of level, or even in university as required reading, because we need to know our history. It's as simple as that. If, for example, we will forget tomorrow that there's a COVID virus, if everything just disappears tomorrow and then we never mention it again, then what lesson have we learned? So I think, exploring these difficult issues or exploring your history and your past of your country is essential even of being part of a citizen.
But do you see any real desire, even if we say, well, okay, we know what the politicians up to, they only want to do things a certain way so that they will always look good. But are you detecting at all any sort of recognition that this has nothing to do with politics, this has nothing to do with whose side you're on and whatever, but it has to do with appreciating and understanding significant events in our history that may probably explain why we are the way we are and why we behave the way we do. Do you see that any movement in that direction at all at a concerted level?
I have seen it more when you introduce the idea to people. And there are also films that have been done about the coup and some in November 1970, which is an important thing. I think people relate easily to films. But in terms of reading, I would say once you introduce the idea to people and you hand them the book, and then I've had people call me almost in tears, like, I didn't know this is what happened. I have seen some sense of interest once again introduce the topic to people. But if you don't introduce the topic to people, then they will never, of their own accord pick it up. And I think that is the biggest part, is trying to get that message out there. And I think once the message is out there that, okay, let's look back and be interested in our history, that people actually will take a look.
And because your father lived through it, he was a hostage, of course, at TTT as well. And you've talked at length. I've read quite a few interviews where you talked about the difficulty that came from that, and the breakup of your parents' marriage, which you just alluded to. Do people appreciate this whole thing called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? Because we hear these labels and we just dismiss it and then go in the bar and take a few drinks and forget about that and study who playing in the Premiership tomorrow, don't bother with all the other issues. Do people really appreciate that the impact, the mental consequences of experiences like this?
I don't think we do. I've been trying to do a film called Raul and I for a number of years. Actually, I started it just before he passed away. Luckily, I have hours of interview with him. And it's very difficult to explain PTSD because, as you say, we hear these still thrown at us all the time, right? ADHD, PTSD, all these kind of things. But it's actually a very serious consequence. I have spoken to other children of people who were involved at that time, either hostage or hostage taker. And we all have similar sort of traumatic experiences from that time, not only because we were worried about our parents, but when they came back home afterwards, it was never, properly dealt with. And I don't think unless you personally went through it, you can fully understand that kind of impact on a family structure, and then, of course, the impact of what actually the society. And it's something that we haven't discussed fully. So I've been talking with Tony, trying to make a film called Children of People, where we can sort of really try to bring that across in a way that people can relate to face-to-face, so to speak.
And I've seen attempts previously to have discourses about things that have happened uncomfortable, but it usually degenerates into a political discourse about all you to blame or them to blame, rather than understanding the actual event, what caused it, what triggered it, what has happened since then. It almost always seems to gravitate towards that naked blame game of this party, or this race, that race sort of thing.
I can safely say that neither of the books engage in that. I can safely say they're more of a historical record than a blame game. That's number one. And number two, I think in order to avoid that, you really have to, if you're going to sort of post a discussion about that, then you have to stay that middle lane very, very clearly, because there's no point in blaming anybody at this point. It's already happened. What we need to discuss is what happened in terms of the aftermath and how it affected families and society.
And
that has nothing to do with blaming anybody at this point. It doesn't.
Indeed, it has happened about 30 years ago now. And just remind everybody again as to how they can access any of these two publications that we were speaking about.
Right. So have them right here. Okay. So 4826074. Or you can find me on Facebook.
Okay. And when do you anticipate that the memoirs will be out for publication?
And I'm aiming for 2022, because that's the 1962 anniversary of when we started journalism. And there are many more works coming out in between. As I said, I'm the guardian of all of his works, so I'm trying to publish his book of poetry this Christmas, and then plays next year, and then the memoir finally here.
So even though he's no longer here physically, he's keeping you very busy. Mandisa Pantin, thanks very much for taking the time to be with us this morning.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome. Mandisa Pantin there, talking about the works of her father, Raoul Pantin, playwright, journalist, broadcaster, multi-talented, but indeed deeply impacted as a hostage during the coup attempt. And when you read him some passages from what he would have written about that experience, you can certainly tell that it really made a significant difference negatively to his life as well. And he struggled to cope with it right until the time of his passing early in 2015. Well, as we go to a break now, let's take a look at